好，确定。
这个可以啊，所以这个是这个星期的视频。Today we are going to talk about the celestial equator. There is a line in the sky called Tianqiu Chidao. In English, it is called the celestial equator. It is the path a star will take if it rises due east and sets due west. If you live in the northern hemisphere, you look at the stars and you would notice their motion. It seems that the stars are on a large sphere called the celestial sphere, or Tianqiu in Chinese. It rotates around the earth. Celestial means star, so it is like a big sphere of stars that seems to rotate around the earth. For thousands of years, it appeared this way to the ancients. Now we know that the earth rotates on its axis and the stars are fixed and very far from earth. If you are in the northern hemisphere, the stars that rise due east and set due west also veer to the south. These are the stars that would be directly overhead if you were standing on the equator. If you are in the southern hemisphere, the stars that rise due east and set due west also veer to the north. Those stars appear to separate the celestial sphere into the northern half, or the northern celestial hemisphere, and the southern half, or the southern celestial hemisphere. Because of this motion, there is a point in the north where all the stars seem to circle around. It is called the celestial North Pole. Nowadays, all the stars circle around a star called the North Star, but that was not always so. Because the Earth slowly changes its rotational axis over a period of about 26,000 years, it is a process called the precession of the equinoxes. The line that divides the celestial sphere into equal parts is called the celestial equator, or Tianqiu Chidao. It literally means the red path. But why? And how do we describe the character for red, which is chi? Chi means naked or red. You see a remnant tu on top, but it actually comes from a big person, da, and a fire, huo, on the bottom. Chi means red. Maybe you can interpret it as a big fire, or you could interpret it as a man, da, standing by a fire, huo. It also means naked, as in Barefoot Doctor or 赤脚医生. Back in the 1960s, the country people in China were desperately poor. The people in the countryside were starving and had no access to food, let alone medical care. So the government trained a bunch of doctors in very basic medical procedures. The doctors were themselves very poor. In fact, some of them barely had shoes themselves. So they were called barefoot doctors, or 赤脚医生. Some people say it comes from a naked man, da, standing by a fire, huo. Is that the real origin? In modern Chinese, 赤道 means the equator, in particular the terrestrial equator, 地球赤道. Terrestrial means earth. That is the line on the surface of the earth that separates equally the northern hemisphere from the southern hemisphere. Modern people know it is the hottest part of the earth because the sun is directly overhead twice a year at the spring and summer equinoxes. It is only in the past few hundred years that we understood that the earth is a sphere and the equator is a line around the earth. In ancient times, it was a line in the sky. The word Chi Dao goes back to the Han Dynasty before anyone knew about the terrestrial equator. No one has ever explained why they called it the red path. Here we have a picture of the celestial equator, which shows its relation to the Earth and the ecliptic and the celestial sphere. The Earth rotates on its axis once every 24 hours. That is why the sun, moon, and the stars appear to rotate around the Earth. If you stand on the terrestrial equator, there will be some stars that rise directly east and go directly overhead and set directly west. These stars are on a line in the sky called the Celestial Equator. All the other stars will rise and set either north or south of the Celestial Equator. Unlike the yellow path, Huang Dao, which means ecliptic, and the white path, Bai Dao, which means the path of the moon, there is no easy way to see which star or stars determine the red path, Chi Dao, or the Celestial Equator. Nowadays, there are not many bright stars on the Celestial Equator, so it is hard to find exactly with the naked eye. In the 21st century, the brightest star close to the Celestial Equator is Mentaka, or Delta Orionis, in the constellation of Orion. Its name derives from the Arabic term for belt, or Mentaka. Mentaka means the belt, and it is the westernmost star in the belt of Orion. So it is the first star of the belt to rise and the first star of the belt to set. It is the rightmost star in the belt of Orion if you are viewing Orion from the northern hemisphere. Mentaka is a very bright star, and it is important nowadays because it is very close to being right on the celestial equator. But Mentaka is not red. So why do they call it the red path? In the night sky, there are two bright stars which appear to be red. One is Mars, which is actually a planet, and the other is Betelgeuse, which is very bright and also quite red. Betelgeuse is a bright red star in the constellation of Orion. It is called Betelgeuse, which derives from either the Arabic meaning for armpit of Orion or Yad al-Juza, meaning the hand of Orion. Modern Chinese call it Shenshou Si. It means the fourth star in the Chinese constellation of Shen, which is Orion. Betelgeuse is usually the ninth brightest star in the sky. It is a variable star, so its apparent magnitude ranges between 0.0 and 1.3. It is the second brightest star in the constellation of Orion after Rigel. Rigel is the brightest star in Orion. It is the star in the bottom right foot of Orion. I thought, could it be that sometime in the past, Betelgeuse was the marker star for the red path? I found that its declination today is 7 degrees. The declination is the number of degrees above or below the celestial equator. Oh no, 7 degrees is way too far above the celestial equator. But then I found this site at Fermilab. Note, it is not the famous Fermilab, which every scientist knows. It is Fermilab, F-O-U-R-M-I-L-A-B, not Fermilab, F-E-R-M-I-L-A-B. It is quite good. I can generate a star map and put all kinds of restrictions on it, such as the date and place on Earth. I did some calculations and found that in 1400 BC, Betelgeuse has a declination of 0 degrees. Conclusion, Betelgeuse is a giant red star, was the celestial equator marker in 1400 BC. That is 1300 years before the Han Dynasty. By the Han Dynasty, it would have been several degrees off. The people still called it the Chi Dao, but forgot where the Chi came from. It makes sense. The ancients personified the stars, so we have the man star Da, and it is like Wo. If you take the angle from the zenith, Dingdian, to the celestial equator at noon, that is what we now call the terrestrial latitude, or Wei Du. The angle is equal to the latitude of the observer. The declination, or Chi Wei, of a star is how far the star is north or south of the celestial equator. The declination of a star does not change throughout the year. The right ascension, or Chi Jing, measures the time a star rises after the vernal equinox point. The vernal equinox point Chunfen Dian is the point in the Chi Dao where the sun crosses the ecliptic or Huang Dao on the vernal equinox, Chunfen. Shen Orion was originally the lower part of Orion. The three stars were represented by Pin, Not, Jing. I believe the following artifact from Sanxing Dui may represent the constellation Orion. This is Betelgeuse from the constellation Orion. See how red it is? Betelgeuse is about 7 degrees off of the celestial equator in 2019 AD. That's too far to be useful as an indicator for the celestial equator. If we do a little checking, we find that Betelgeuse was exactly on the celestial equator in 1400 BC.
Okay. 对，
这个好，我回来了。那么他们不会看吗？这个，
这个，哎，好
啊，回来了。所以，我刚刚说那个知道，你们都明白吗？喂，你们会不会听到？
听到老师。
Oh. So this story about there, I discussed a couple of characters there. One is Chi. How many of you know Chi?
有一点点是明白的。
Oh.
因为说的太快，有些字来不及读。
Oh. 所以你可能这个星期你可能听这个视频可以听几次。我发现在中国我们有两种人，一般的中国人是文科，另外一般的中国人是理科。文科是学文科的，理科是学理科的。In China, if you come here, you will quickly see that Chinese are separated into two things that they will study before high school. You'll either study science and you'll be pretty good at it, or you will study the arts and end up knowing very little about science. So this video, I'm not sure how many of you can understand the astronomy. Maybe you will have to listen 2 or 3 times, but maybe it'll be easy to understand, maybe not so easy. So 你看了这个视频，你觉得什么样？你觉得难不难？你懂不懂我的意思？ As you see this, give me your opinion of this video. How well do you understand it? 5%, 25%, 50%, 100%? 喂，我要你们回答。你可以回答。喂。Okay. 我听不到任何的人讲话。I can't hear anybody speaking.
如果我的话，老师，我因为不太懂英文吧，所以对老师的解释也了解的还一点不多。
不多。你像这个字吃，你现在知道是什么意思吗？如果我说吃到医生 ，OK， 现在我可以写
我来给你，好的，然后 是这个吧？
OK， 这个你们应该都听得懂、看得懂吗？
看到老师。
看到，所以有这个是给你看太阳，这是夏天的太阳、冬天的太阳、春天的太阳。在春天的时候或是秋天的时候，那个太阳是从东到西，然后如果你是在北半球，它是偏南边。So in this picture, you see the sun. It goes from east to west. In the winter, it's very low. In the summer, it's very high if you're in the northern hemisphere. And in the spring, spring equinox and autumn equinox, it goes from directly east to directly west. And it veers to the south if you're in the northern hemisphere. 这个路从绝对东到绝对西，这个叫天球赤道。天球 means the star sphere, and 赤道 means the red path. So, 给我你的意见，我刚刚说的你懂吗？大家都懂吗？ Do you all understand that?
应该还可以。
应该还可以。好，所以这个赤道，你看那个赤道的赤，现在这么写，这个是红色的意思。我问我自己，为什么这个是红色？为什么他们叫赤道 ？Why do they call it the red path? And 这个字跟what is the word? What does the word have to do with red? 这个，所以这个是另外一个图，你看中间有地球，然后如果你站在赤道就是 equator， 如果你就是说赤道就是 equator。If you only say the word 赤道, it usually means equator. It actually means red path. But 古代的中国人他们不知道这个赤道是什么东西。In ancient times, they didn't know about the equator on the earth. The equator you think about is called the Dicho Cherdao. The equator we usually think about is the terrestrial equator. It goes around the earth. But there are stars that appear to go around the earth. And there are some stars that go directly east to directly west. And if you're standing on the equator, they go directly overhead. And this is called the Tianqiu Cherdao. That's the stars that go from directly east to directly west. 你们有没有问题？有没有意见？你觉得这个太复杂，或是没有问题？
是有一点点复杂。
有一点点复杂。对。
我们开始讲字吧。
开始讲字，好。
好。这个对，应该是这个，对，这个字。
Okay, so we'll talk about the word. You see the current word, it has like a tu on the top, something on the bottom, and it comes from a da on the top and a ho on the bottom. So, a man by a fire. basically means red, but it also means naked. We used to have something called the Chijiao Yisheng, which means the Barefoot Doctor. Back in the 60s and 70s, Chinese were very, very poor, many of them starving and no doctors. So they trained a lot of people with basic medicine and they sent them to the countryside. The doctors were very poor themselves and sometimes barely had any shoes. So they called them barefoot doctors, Chijiao Yisheng. 如果你看地球，如果你看这个赤道的上面的星星，赤道的上面的星星，这个是叫天球赤道。他们是星星好像是要绕过地球。可是我问我自己，为什么叫赤道？ Why do they call it the red path? This is the Dicho Chidao, and we have latitude. 你们都知道 latitude 是北边南边 longitude 是东边西边。所以你可以要理解这个赤道，从天文学的这个是非常重要的一个道，是绝对东到绝对西，然后在北半球他们会偏南边的。So in astronomy, this celestial equator is extremely important. The stars that go from due east to due west, and they veer to the south. So how do we find this line? Now in 2020, there's a star called Mentaka. There's a constellation called Orion. Orion, probably most of you have heard of Orion, and maybe you recognize it. 3 bright stars in a line. 那个是它的in the belt of Orion. 所以现在 Mentaka 你可以看这个星星是差不多绝对东到差不多绝对西，所以现在它是代表赤道。可是我们还不知道为什么叫赤道。可是那个晚上有2个星星是很有光有红的，一个是火星，火星是 Mars。But Mars is not a star. 有另外一个是 Betelgeuse 是如果晚上如果你看到，你可以看的是非常红的。所以我问我自己，这个如果 Betelgeuse 这个红色的，如果它在赤道上，这个很方便。So I asked myself, if Betelgeuse was on the ecliptic, or if it was on the celestial equator, it would be easy to find. But it isn't. 这个是另外一个，你看这个是 Orion Betelgeuse。Orion 有另外一个星星是也是非常光，叫 Regal。可是我看现在我在这边我画的现在的赤道，然后我画了 Betelgeuse。现在 Betelgeuse 是非常红的，可是它现在离开赤道很远，这是7度的，所以它不能代表这个赤道。可是我问我自己，会不会以前的时候，古代的时候，它会不会代表赤道？所以我做了一些研究，我找到一个非常有意思的，如果你对天文学有兴趣的，你可以来这个 Formilab， 然后你可以学习天文学，你可以看所有的星座。星座是什么？有没有人知道？ Does anybody know？ 星座
Zodiac
是什么？
Zodiac
星座是 constellation。星座是 constellation。So 我问我自己这个，对，如果你来这个 Formilab， 你可以看那个星座。If you come to Formilab, you can see the stars, and you can pretend you're in the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. You can pretend you're in China or South America. At Formilab, you can see all of the constellations anytime, day or night, long ago or into the future. So this website is very interesting. So I went to the website and I made some calculations. I found out that in 1400 BC, Betelgeuse was exactly on the Chi Dao. In 1400 BC, Betelgeuse, the red star, was exactly on Chi Dao, the red path. So I thought it was quite interesting. Ah, 我没有说这个Chi Dao
你可以返回去说。
所以你知道古代的中国人，他们拜那个星星，他们拜太阳，他们也是拜月亮，也是拜星星的。所以在古代的中国，这个 Betelgeuse 它是一个非常重要的一个星星。So they would worship it like a god. When they make the Da, it's not just a big man, it's a god. And the Hua is red, the fire is red. So Chi means basically the red god star that defines the Chi Dao. 这个是我发现的。这个参加的参，有的时候读申，这个是一个星座。This character represents a constellation called Orion. Sometimes it's pronounced Chan. It means Chanja, to attend. But sometimes it's pronounced Shen, and it means the constellation Orion. 你可以看它古代的时候，它有3个星星，这个是 Orion 的那个3个星星。然后，在中国有一个非常有名的地方叫三星堆 ，It means the hill of the 3 stars. And they found this bird there. They don't know what it is, but I think it represents Orion. 所以现在我讲话很多. I've been speaking a lot, but I want to hear from you guys. What do you think of this? What do you want to know? What do you want to discuss? Do you have questions? Dead air. Any questions? No questions? Come on, ask me a question. So, 我刚刚说的话，你们听得懂多少？
老师，那这个如果生是这个样子的，那为什么这个还叫参加的那个参呢？
为什么叫参？就是他们摆那个星星，是古代的时候，你可以看上面有3个星星，对不对？
汉老师他说的是就是申是一个多音字，它有申代表星宿的意思。
参跟申，参申。In Chinese, we have many 破音字. 破音字 means the characters can have multiple sounds. Sometimes the multiple sounds, they come from different dialects. Sometimes the multiple sounds come from 2 pronunciations of words that mean the same thing. So, and sometimes if the meaning of the word changes, the pronunciation will change a little bit. So here we have the original meaning of the word was, the original pronunciation, the original meaning was the constellation. 那个奔翼, the original meaning was the Orion constellation. 可是他们借用的是用在参加的参，可能几千年以前参加的参跟神州的是同一个读法。So probably 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, Shen, this character had 1 pronunciation, but because it had 2 meanings, the pronunciations came apart. So this is called 破音字. 破音 means broken sound. Sometimes they call it 多音字, which means multi-sound word. 破音字 or 多音字 means different, has more than 1 pronunciation. So there are several reasons. Like I say, sometimes 1 meaning that will separate the pronunciation.
明白了，老师，谢谢老师。
So, Chinese, they had their gods, their ancient gods, and Chi was one of them. The Da indicates that it was either a man or a god. And in this case, it would have been a god because it was a star in the sky. And so, any other questions? Come on, ask me some questions.
So if I ask you a question, it's about are you all clear about the difference between the terrestrial equator and the celestial equator? 有没有人会告诉我这个分别？天球赤道跟地球赤道，非洲是天球赤道或是地球赤道？非洲是有天球赤道或是地球赤道？你们听得懂吗？ I can't hear you.
老师再讲一遍。
非洲 Africa is it by the terrestrial equator or the celestial equator? If you're in Africa, are you close to the terrestrial equator or the celestial equator? 天球赤道或是地球赤道？
地球赤道。
Yeah, good. Okay. Now in China, sometimes I have a lot of trouble with this class because some people have no knowledge of astronomy, but some people do. So anyway, so it's any more questions or comments?
老师没有，就是比较难懂的理解这个赤。
对，所以在古代的中国人，他们是做那个占星术，占星术是 astrology， 所以他们相信太阳是一个神，月亮是一个神，星星是神，所以这个赤道上面有一个不是赤，我是赤道的赤。我看。所以你看这个上面有一个人，这个不是一个人，这个是一个神，它很大，它就在太空里。This is not a man. This is a god. And the fire indicates that he's red. So this originally indicated Betelgeuse. And Betelgeuse indicated the celestial equator. Okay, 这个星期我的功课可能比较难，下个星期我的功课比较容易。This week
I hope so.
Yeah. This week my class is a little bit difficult because it's about astronomy. Next week, my class will be about plants, so it will be pretty easy. So this is the first.
能不能讲慢一点？
Oh, so this week, my class was about astronomy, so maybe it's a little difficult. Next week, my class will be about plants. So next week, my class will be pretty easy. 现在 我已经做了，我们结束第一班，我们休息10分钟，然后回来再教你一些天文学。OK。
老师，我想问，下个星期也是用这样的那个软件上课吗？还是用腾讯会议呢？
他们这个不是我的决定？学校这个是学校决定的，他们也是给我们也是花一点时间。大概他们决定是我们必须用这个软件。也可以吗？他们我的助理说可以用那个另外一个软件，通信软件。
对，但是因为他要跟这个系统一起，所以他们可能建议用这个。因为如果学生不登录这个的话，就没办法用那个学校的系统去看这个课程里面的别的东西。
Let's try to use this software. If there's a big problem, tell me about it.
好的，老师，好的，谢谢老师。
好，我来给你调一下。OK。
All Russians.
好。
OK。
那你先跟他们讲一下，你让他们回。
这个在录制课程吗？
在录课。
现在我们开始上课。现在要给你另外一个视频。
等一下。
No matter where you were in the ancient world, the king or chief was like a god. Vladimir the Great was the Tsar of Russia in 987 CE, when he declared that all Russians should become Christians, and all Russians became Christians. Before that, Russians were pagans. Can you imagine such a thing happening today? It is just an indication that even in the West and even into recently modern times, the king or president in many ways is like a god. In ancient China, the emperor was called the son of heaven, or Tianzi. Huang Dao means emperor. There are several emperors that come to mind. Here we see a picture of Emperor Taijing of Tom, Tang Taizong. He reigned from 28th of January 598 to the 10th of July 649. Taizong, previously Prince of Qin, a personal name was Li Siming, was the second emperor of Tang, ruling from 626 to 649. He is traditionally regarded as a co-founder of the dynasty for his role in encouraging Li Yuan, his father, to rebel against the Sui dynasty at Jinyang in 617. Note the character Huang. Huang Di is the name of a mythical emperor called the Yellow Emperor. This is a Yellow Emperor, Huang Di, the mythical emperor credited with inventing almost everything Han, or in other words, everything Chinese, including the Chinese lunar calendar. His traditional reign dates are 2697 to 2597 BC. Huang Di is pronounced exactly the same as Huang Di, means emperor. You see here a picture of Shi He, the goddess of the sun and calendar in ancient Chinese mythology. She was the earliest astronomer and calendar maker in China, according to the Taijing, the classic of the mountains and seas. Shi He was the mother of the sun. She gave birth to 10 sons and arranged for them to cruise in the sky in turn. Huang Dao means the yellow path, or ecliptic. In English, the word ecliptic comes from Greek and literally means cannot see. When Ptolemy wrote the Almagest in the 2nd century AD, they knew the earth was round, but they thought the sun, moon, and the planets circled around the earth. The moon orbited around the earth, but was in a different plane than the sun. If the moon crossed the plane between the sun and the earth at the right time, you had an eclipse of the sun. If the moon crossed the ecliptic plane on the other side of the sun, you had an eclipse of the moon. So the word ecliptic could either refer to the sun's plane or the ecliptic plane or the sun's path. In modern times, the word ecliptic refers to the path that the sun appears to take through the stars over a period of a year. It should technically be called the celestial ecliptic. The yellow path, or the path of the sun, is not the daily path of the sun crossing the sky. It is the yearly path of the sun through the stars. In modern Chinese, we might call it Taijing of Tom, which, if we translate character by character, means the big light path. In modern English, it is called the ecliptic. In the modern worldview, the ecliptic plane is the plane of the Earth as it orbits around the sun. In the Earth-centered worldview, the ecliptic plane is the plane of the sun as it travels through the celestial sphere. They are both the same thing, but from different points of view. Huanghun means dusk. It literally means sun sets. So we have several instances where Huang, or yellow, actually means sun. Huang is the character for yellow. As we trace it back, we see at one point we have something on the top, which disappears. The earliest character consists of a man, Da, which also means big, and the character for sun. Sometimes it is just a ko for the sun. In modern Chinese, we use the characters Taiyang to represent the sun. They are the same components. Tai is a modified big. Yang is an indication that the sun is over the sundial. Huang Di, the Yellow Emperor, is a mythical man god who was the originator of China. I believe that the character Huang originally referred to the sun god. The modern character has something at the top, which will turn out to be a Huang, which I will discuss later. Huang Di, pronounced exactly the same as Huang Di, and means emperor. The character means a light, or looking at the original pictograph, it seems clear that it also refers to the sun god. The emperor is the manifestation of the sun god who lives on earth, Tu. We call the emperor the son of heaven, Tianzi.
你要讲课还是看图片？
要他们可以看我。哦，对啊，好，回来这个也可能差不多一样的，你们呢看得懂吗？看得懂？
还可以，老师。
还可以，好，很好。所以这个在古代的生活，天文学是非常非常重要的，因为差不多1万年以前，人类发生了，他们怎么可以算冬至跟春分，然后他们会知道什么时候天气会变冷的，什么时候天气会变热的，然后什么时候要种田。So astronomy, a basic knowledge of astronomy is a matter of life and death to ancient people. They needed to know when to plant the crops. They knew that the year would get, there was a time of year when it was very cold, but they knew after many, many, many days, it would get warmer and warmer. Then it would get very hot. Then it would get colder and colder. And people who lived long enough, they knew that there was this cycle. It was called the weather year. And people who lived long enough, they realized that if you planted crops in the warming period, in the spring, then you would have crops. But how did you know when spring came? 古代的人他们慢慢知道，如果他们活到老，他们会知道这个天气会变成越来越冷，好几天，然后会慢慢变成越来越热，好几天。可是他们不知道这个好几天，他们不能数那么多。可是他们学了天文学，他们有一些方法，他们可以知道什么时候是冬天，什么时候是冬至，什么时候是春分。So knowledge of astronomy was a matter of life and death. Unfortunately, in the modern world, your teacher tells you in the 5th grade that the earth goes around the sun, but most people never can prove it. In the ancient world, they didn't know the earth went around the sun, but they knew a whole lot about the motion of the stars and the sun and the moon. They could tell when winter was here and when spring would begin. 所以他们古代的人，他们以为太阳、月亮、星星，都是神。They believed that the stars were gods, and many people still do. So let's see. Mentaka.
先共享。
对。
好，然后点全屏。
So this is Vladimir the Great. 现在全世界有一些人是基督徒，有一些人是回教徒，有一些人是佛教，然后大部分的人不会改变。在历史里面有一段时间是耶稣出生之后，然后非常快的这个基督徒，全部的欧洲变成基督徒。然后有另外一段时间是公元后700年，又发生一个穆罕默德，然后有一段时间100-200年，半个世界，全部的非洲，全部的印度， 中东的都变成回教徒。It's very interesting to me why there were a couple of periods where Christianity, one religion, spread all over the place, and another period where Islam spread all over the place at a very rapid rate. I ask myself, why? Russia, Vladimir studied Islam and he studied Christianity, and he decided that all the Russians should be Christians, and all of the Russians became Christians. This is extremely unusual. It would never happen today. 你可以相信你的总统或是谁告诉你要还你的信仰，这个不能发生。所以古代的人他们以为那个国王或是皇帝，他们以为他是一个神的样子。在中国他们说天子 the son of heaven. The emperor, whatever he said, you did that. 天子是一个字，皇帝是另外一个字。我们有这个字皇帝，你可以看现在的上面有一个白，下面有一个王，然后帝今天不讲帝，皇帝就是 emperor。中国有好几个 emperor， 那个皇帝，这个是唐太宗，你可以学3个字，太是大，唐太宗他是公元后598年到公元后648年，他是一个皇帝 emperor。 你可以学这个字，你可以看这个字。这个是另外一个皇帝，他们2个字，皇帝跟皇帝 emperor 跟 yellow emperor， 那个2个字他们读的一样，帝就是国王的意思。然后这个黄色的黄，英文我们说 the yellow emperor， 黄色的黄，你怎么可以画一个黄？古代汉字是象形文字，你怎么可以画一个黄色？ So I'm always asking myself the question, this means yellow. How do you draw a picture of yellow? You can't draw a picture of yellow. You have to draw a picture of something that represents yellow. Well, the sun is yellow. Maybe it has something to do with the sun.
那个问题很有意思。我觉得那个问题很有意思。
对，这个
那叫黄道吗？还是西河？
那个有3个字的那个，
在这个黄，
这个
对。
So 我们看这个黄色的黄，我那个括号 parentheses， 这个是一个简体字，然后右边是繁体字，这2个字很像，你可以学习一下简体字、繁体字。如果我们看那个简体字，你可以看这是最右边的，上面有一个 绿色的东西，那个好像是一个草字头，可是不是一个草字头。如果你看繁体字，不知道上面是什么东西，可是上面是越来越像一个人。到甲骨文，我们可以看，现在这个可以相信一个人，可是他的腰部有什么东西。So here we have the character for yellow. What is it a picture of? Many people don't notice, but there's a difference between the simplified character and the traditional character. There was a big fight a few years ago about how we should simplify Chinese. And people in Taiwan insisted that they must keep the traditional form, and the people in China insisted that they must have the simplified form, but they're almost the same. If we go back to the seal character, we can see it's still very similar. If we go back to the oracle character, the top part disappears. And we have something that clearly looks like a person with something around his waist. But what is it? 我们分析汉字的，我分析汉字，我想知道原来的象形文字是什么意思。这个很难说，因为在好几百年、几千年，一个字会改变它的意思，所以我们常常来问它的本意是什么。When trying to figure out what the original picture was, we want to figure out first what the original form was, and then what the original meaning was. Characters change their meaning over the centuries. So what was the original meaning? Now it means yellow. 我们有几个字，黄昏 means sunset. So 这个是在这个地方，黄就是太阳，昏就是下来的意思。然后你可以看这个昏的下面有太阳，太阳在下面，那个下面是一个人跪下来诗。所以在这边黄昏，黄色的意思就是太阳的意思。皇帝是 Yellow Emperor， 可是如果古代的中国人是拜太阳，如果那个 Yellow Emperor， 如果他真的是太阳，这个也是太阳的意思。然后太阳这两个字我们可以分析，太就是大的意思。I'll go over that in English. When you try to figure out what the original picture is, we try to figure out what the original meaning is. And we look at the modern word Huang Hun. It means sunset. Hun means to go down. You see the sun on the bottom, and on the top you have a shi, which is actually a person bowing down. And so Huang, it actually means sun here. And in Huang Di, the Yellow Emperor, we know he was a mythical person. No such real person could exist. But could he be the manifestation of the sun god? If we look at the oracle character, we see a man, and actually we see the pictograph of the sun. here the man is just not a big man. The man is a god. And Taijing, we see the word da with a dot under it. In Mandarin, we say da. That means big. In Cantonese, they say dai, and a modification is tai. So tai means big. Taijing, yang means light. The fantizi, you can see a on the top and a gui or sundial on the bottom. So big light. So 我想黄色的黄就是一个大，就是代表一个人或是一个神，然后有个日，这个就是代表太阳，它的本意就是太阳。然后有另外一个字叫黄道。There's another ancient character the Chinese knew about, the ecliptic. The sun takes a path through the stars, and that path is in Chinese called the Huang Dao, the yellow path. The yellow path is the path of the sun. And they have another word, Bai Dao, which is white path. That's a path of the moon. So give me some feedback. Don't go to sleep. 不要睡觉。有没有问题？有没有意见？有没有想法？
没有意见。
你有意见吗？有没有问题？
问题还没想到，老师。
还没有想到。所以我说的话，你都明白我的意思吗？
意思是明白的，但是内容比较难。
对，慢慢来，然后你可以看我的视频，你可以看几次。有没有人听到24节气
？24节气？
对。
听过老师。
你知道是什么意思吗？
有24个的那个天气的那个季节，比如小雨啊、冬至之类的。
对。你知道有多少个人听过24节气？有没有别的人听过24节气？ Has anybody else heard of the 24节气 in English? 听过。3个人听过？
没有。
Okay. In China, everybody's heard of it. They break the year into 24 parts. Each part is about 2 weeks long, about 15 days long. And each part has a name that has to do with the weather, mostly the weather. And Chinese all know about it. So foreigners will learn about it eventually. But what is it? If you see the picture here, you see the sun. And the sun, let's see. This isn't the best picture. You see a circle there that says ecliptic, and it says Huang Dao. And the Earth goes around the sun. The Earth is on the ecliptic, 你们都会看到那个黄道在下面在周边的绿色的那个黄道，然后也说 ecliptic. In the lower left, you see in blue it says ecliptic, and you have a circle that goes around the sun. Actually, you see there's a circle that says March 21st, July 23rd, November 22nd, and you see the Earth going around the sun. If you were an ancient Chinese, you would look at the sun and you would see that there are stars behind the sun. And you would say, the sun is, if there was Gemini and stars behind the sun, you would say the sun is in the house of Gemini. And 地球会绕过太阳，再过一段时间，太阳的背后有其他的星座。You see, as the Earth goes around,
要喝点水。
要喝水。You see, as the Earth, 对不起。You see, as the Earth goes around the sun, each month there's a different constellation behind the sun. Those constellations are the Zodiac. And there's something behind the Zodiac. It's called the 24 solar terms. If you look at where the sun is, you can tell something about the weather. But that path is called the yellow path. It's the path that from the earth, it looks like the sun is taking a path through the stars. In ancient China, they called that the yellow path. And the Chinese have known about this for, well, we can be sure that the Egyptians have known about it for at least 5,000 years. We can be sure that humans have known about it for almost 10,000 years. 我们可以确定，在埃及他们5000年以前会知道这个道，这个黄道。中国人也差不多可以确定。我们可以确定是差不多1万年以前第一个人，他们开始知道这个黄道。The stars that rise through the sun, they told the weather. And people have known this for thousands of years. 所以这个图我觉得非常好。你学这个图，你可以学很多。那个地球绕太阳，太阳的背后有星星，有星座，有那个 Zodiac。然后它的背后有24节气。So when you come to live in China, and you're talking to Chinese every day, you'll hear about the 24节气, the 24 solar terms. And when it gets to one of the 节气 like Dahan or something like that, when it gets to 小雪, Chofan, when it gets to Chofan, all the Chinese will put on their jackets because they know it's going to be cold. Anyway, you might want to look at this picture and study it. Eventually, you will talk to some Chinese about the 24节气. Any questions or comments? Let's talk about something. I don't want to talk all the time because it's hard in my throat. I'm coughing. So tell me something. We got about 15 more minutes.
老师，所以这个图片就是像那个算八字的那个是吗？因为有星座啊，然后日期啊，然后太阳朝哪里啊，是看八字的，好像是那个风水是吗？
风水是迷信。你知道几千年以前，中国人发生他们看了星星，然后他们发现，比如说在埃及，他们发现那个全球，如果跟太阳起来，那个尼罗河会淹碎。你可以说这个是 astrology， 可是它真的是天文学。So with astronomy, for thousands of years, we have known that the tides will rise and fall based on where the sun and moon are. But nobody understood. It was, for thousands of years, it was like magic. The sun and the moon, they could control the tides. It was only 300 years ago that we found out why. So, 现在的风水，人家说风水就是迷信。Nowadays, if you say 风水, it's superstition because there's no science behind it. But astronomy and astrology were very closely connected for thousands of years because only slowly could we separate what was really happening. The dog star in Egypt, it meant that the Nile would flood, but nobody knew why. It was like magic. So astrology. But finally, we figured out that, slowly we figured out one relation after another. So 风水是迷信的。风水 is, it brings in stars and all that kind of stuff, but it's basically superstition. In China, there are still a lot of people who believe in feng shui. Most people don't, I think. But many people still believe in feng shui. Many people still believe in astrology. But I try to separate, you have two zodiacs here. You have the sidereal zodiac and the tropical zodiac. The tropical zodiac is superstition. The sidereal zodiac is astronomy. But you have to know the difference and how they came to be. 所以这个我们说那个12宫 means the zodiac, and 12 Huang Dao Xing Zhou means the zodiac. But one of them means the astrology zodiac, which is 迷信 or superstition. The other means the astronomical zodiac, which is astronomy. But it took many years to figure out the difference. 有没有人有故事? Anybody have a story about superstition?
老师，我可以问一下吗？
好，可以。
就是刚才您说的那个12宫，比如说金牛宫、双子宫，这些如果是看到这些，是不是跟那个也是好像塔罗牌的这些也是用这些来算 那个也是迷信的嘛，
呃
是有根据那个根据天文的那个学说。
如果你看这个有2个字，一个是白羊座，一个是白羊宫。白羊宫确定是迷信的，白羊座也是基本是天文学的，这个分别是很复杂，因为这个Zodiac 是2000多年以前开始利用的。他们有一边知道那个 Zodiac 你可以计算那个春秋那个冬至等等，可是它慢慢改变了，所以中国人说那个白羊宫if they know what they're talking about, 白羊宫 is always superstition. 白羊座 is, if they know what they're talking about, is astronomy. Some people are not clear. Some Chinese are not clear of the difference, but there are 2 zodiacs. One is about astronomy and scientific. The other is about astrology and not scientific.
老师，就是那个，是不是也可以算，就是比如说，发生，不是，也不是真的算是那个迷信的，但是比如说，发生一些天灾，比如说，像这个海里的水啊，会涨啊，怎么
对，
样？是不是会有这样的现象？
对，好几千年，我们知道那个海草是跟星星有关系的，可是我们不知道，就是最近的300年，我们知道是地心引力，可是好几千年我们知道有关系，有一部分是科学的，可是也是我们都不懂，所以他们以为哇，如果太阳跟月亮会控制海洋，这个他们应该是神，所以我们要拜太阳，先拜星星的，所以难怪几百年以前、几千年以前是很多人相信占星术，就是 astrology， 可是现在应该会分开的，这个星星不会影响我自己的生活，可是可能会影响别的东西。So we should always think what is real and what is not. Sometimes it's difficult.
所以像那种塔罗牌的那些也是迷信的，是吧，老师？
你说什么塔罗牌？Tarot cards， 在我的观念，我有很多的朋友，他们相信 Tarot cards， 我有很多的朋友，他们相信易经，我自己不相信。你可以思考，你把那个 Tarot cards，拍出来，它渐渐的会算你的命吗？有的人相信，有的人说是迷信。What do you think？ 你相信吗？
我不相信，但是如果是根据这一些天文学可以看天然的东西是科学的，是吧？
我们都要思考，不管什么样，我们都要思考有没有真正的关系，或是可能的关系，或是没有关系。
好的，谢谢老师。
对，有没有别的人有意见或是想法？这个 Tarot cards， 对，很有意思。易经，你有没有相信易经？有没有人相信易经？你知道易经吗？你们都知道易经吗？ Everybody knows about the 易经? Probably.
听过老师？
听过？
没听过。
就是如果是西方的是按照这个双子座啊、金牛座这个12星座，然后中国的是用易经来算。
对对，所以因为我们越来越进步，我们都要思考能不能相信所有的任何的东西，能不能相信总统，能不能相信针灸，能不能相信易经、八卦。在中国，八卦有2个意思，八卦是一个算命的方法，也是一个胡说的意思。In China, we have bagua, which is one way to cast your fortune. But the word has also come to mean somebody who bullshits, who is superstitious or just talks off the top of their head. Bagua. 有没有别的人有意见或是想法或是问题？我觉得这个图很有意思，你可以看那个12星座跟12宫，12宫跟12星座，你可以学一下。有没有别的意见？
那老师有研究过这个12星座的来源吗？
有，这个12星座的，我们最早的历史里面的知道的是巴比伦，埃及也有，3000这个历史里面的，我们可以越来越早，我们越来越不清楚。可是公元前3000年，巴比伦他们已经有这个12星座，这个是自然的，12星座是自然的，因为一年如果月亮的一年有差不多12个月，然后好几千年以前，他们都知道这个黄道，所以他们要分开这个黄道是12块，这个是自然的，这个跟天文学有关系的。在巴比伦3000年以前，他们分成那个黄道是变成360份。The Babylonians separated the sky into 360 parts. That's where we get 360 degrees. They separated into 360 parts because they thought that year should have 360 days. 所以这个有历史的观点，也有科学的观点，可是也有迷信的观点。然后有好几千年，他们慢慢来分这个科学方面的跟迷信的方面。Yeah, the Zodiac has been around for a long time. 12地支就是 Zodiac. Any other comments, questions? 有没有别的意见、想法？下一次我们可以讲植物，植物不是那么难，植物很简单的。古代的中国人，他们的农业非常重要的，所以我们下一次讲一些植物的汉字的来源。所以现在结束。So that's it for astronomy. Next week, we'll talk about plants, which will be much simpler. And we'll talk about ancient farming and stuff like that. So